So the first step in making sourdough bread is called the starter. You can see mine here, wrapped up in a nice little bow. Now all the starter is a mixture of flour and water that lets the wild yeast that is present naturally in flour come alive, and then whenever you go to make bread with it, this wild yeast will act as though baker's yeast, normal yeast. So I'm just going to switch on my scale, let it come to 0. If you're making sourdough bread on your own, you're going to want your starter to be at least a week old before you try anything with it. This starter is probably 2 or 3 months old now at this stage. So to feed it, I do an equal gram measurement. You can see my scale is set to grams of flour. I'm using plain flour at the moment because all our shops are out of bread flour, and water. So just going to very roughly add it in, aiming for about 50 grams, and I got 50 grams on the nose. Now for the water. So I'm going to add in 50 grams again of water. A little bit more. So all I need to do now is mix this, and in about 12 hours time I will make the dough. So I'll see you then. Alrighty, hello and welcome back. It is quite late, almost 11 p.m, and I have weighed out 150 grams of my sourdough starter. Just going to show you inside here. Hopefully the camera will pick up some of those nice bubbles that are going on in the starter. There we go. So that's what your starter should look like if it's ready to be used. So as I said, I've weighed out 150 grams of starter. I'm going to add 285 grams of water. Once my scales turn on. 285. Now this is quite a forgiving recipe. You can see I am spilling my water. Oop. Okay, so I added 300 grams of water instead of 285. No worry, I'll add in a little bit more flour to make up for it. So the recipe calls for 500 grams of flour. But as I added a little bit too much water, I'm going to overshoot that just a little bit. Ordinarily I would be a little bit more precise, but I'm doing this one-handed to filling. So I'm bringing this to about just over 800 grams because it was 300 grams of water. Let's bring this to just over 800 grams. Now, you're also going to want to add in a shake of salt. I'm using sea salt here. It doesn't terribly matter what salt you use. I'm just going to add in a couple grams of salt. There we go. I'm also going to add in approximately a teaspoon of brown sugar. If I had 2 hands, I would actually measure out a teaspoon. As it is, I'm just going to eyeball it. Very forgiving recipe, like I said. That should be about enough. Alright, and you don't need any other leavening agent. All the yeast is in your starter. It's been coming alive as you've been feeding it over the course of the week. Okay, so now I'm going to mix this together, knead it well, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. Alrighty, so after a couple of minutes kneading, you're left with something like this. I just got stuck in there with my hands, very lightly dusted with flour. You're not going to want to turn this out onto a floured surface or anything like that at this stage, otherwise you'll dry the dough out. It's going to be quite sticky. It will stick to your hand, but it's not going to be so wet that you can't sort of scrape the dough or pull clumps of the dough off your hands. So it's very shaggy looking at the moment, but I guarantee it will look better, smoother, overall more like a ball of dough that we can bake in the morning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover this with a tea towel overnight and come back to it in the morning. See you then. Good morning. Our dough has risen from last night. It is nice and springy, such that if you press down on it, it will start to come back up, which is exactly what you want. That feels really good. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this out onto a very lightly floured surface. I'm going to knead it. I'm going to shape it by folding in on itself until it's the shape that I want, which is a slightly circular loaf shape. I'm going to put it on some non-stick baking paper and I'm going to leave it to rest for 30 minutes. I'll see you when that's done. So our 30 minutes are almost up. I've got my oven preheating to 180 degrees Celsius, and there are just a couple of things I need to talk about before we put the bread in the oven. First of all, you may have heard of a Dutch oven, which is an enclosed environment where your bread can get nice and steamed up and puff up well and the crust can form. I don't have one of those, and you likely don't either if it's your first time making sourdough. What I use is a simple pot. I have a lid. Make sure it's oven safe. You don't want to have melted plastic in your oven. If you don't have any pot that can fit your loaf or that is oven safe, you can just make it in a loaf tin or on a tray. But what you're going to want to do is include a tray of water in the oven along with your bread to create that steamy environment that the crust needs. You're also going to want to score the bread with a sharp knife. Just one straight cut, slightly angled is ideal. It will create a nice ear, a nice crust on the loaf. So I'm going to cook it in my pot, covered for 20 minutes. I'm going to take off the lid after those 20 minutes and continue to bake at 180 degrees Celsius for another 20 to 30 minutes. You want the crust to be a nice rich brown colour, not gold. You're going to want to cook it a little bit longer than you think it's going to need. You really want that nice rich brown, almost dark colour on the crust. So I'm going to put this in the oven to preheat along with it. When the time comes and the oven is nice and hot, I will put the bread, non-stick paper and all, into the pot, put the lid. I'm also going to sprinkle the bread with a little bit of water, just so it can create that nice steamy environment inside the pot when I put the lid on. So I'll see you in about 40 to 50 minutes.